Hey everybody, this is Garrett with Earth and Time, and today I'm going to take you to explore some of the forgotten and unusual cemeteries around Spring, Texas, as well as we'll make a quick stop into the town of Spring itself, or Old Town Spring as it's known now, to check out some of my favorite kind of little shops there and places to eat, so I can inform you about some of the history that's tied to these cemeteries. With that being said, let's get to it. From across the street, you can see why probably very few people know there's a cemetery down this road, and you can really get an idea that you wouldn't even notice there was something there unless you actually looked it up online. And as I'm standing here, you'll see all the cars going by as I, much like the game Frogger, worked my way across the road over to this entry into where the first cemetery we're going to go visit today, the actual Spring Cemetery, is at. You can take a look at how a lot of this road is in disrepair. You can see all the gravel down there. The actual road is falling apart. There's debris. Usually, in the past when I've come down here, this is usually all overgrown, so it looks like they maybe cleaned it up. So not quite as a forgotten feeling as I've had in the past when I've come down here. I first found out about this place when I downloaded a historic markers app for Texas, and they had this marker here, and I've driven down this road going to Old Town Spring and other places many times, and I was shocked to learn that there was actually a cemetery hiding down here, down this old road, where there's really not much here, and the closest part of town, so the main Spring downtown area, is about a mile away or so to the west of here. Although this says Spring was established in 1873, I think maybe that's the actual incorporation date. There are actually people living in this area as late as the 1840s and 1850s, including the Wunsche family, which we will go take a look at some of their grave markers and that unusual cemetery. Probably the most unusual cemetery maybe I've ever seen. However, while we're here, let's go take a look at what we can see here inside of this Spring Cemetery. Now, they've recently cut down all the grass here. Last time I was here, the grass was well up to my hip height. You could barely see any of the gravestones. In fact, you can see some of the leftover remnants of how high and large some of the bushes and trees that were growing in here. And it's been like that every time I've come here until when I made the short here a couple days ago. And some of you said you wanted to learn a little bit more after I posted that shorts video. So I'm here in the early part of January, and you'll see there's still a wreath up here, and I wonder if that's why they cleaned it out. I've never been here during the holiday period, so maybe this gets overgrown in between those times, and then for the holidays they come through and they cut everything down. As I walk around, I'll show you some of the interesting, I guess, sites within the cemetery here. One is there's a kind of a random wrought iron fence around the base of this tree. I'm assuming there probably was a marker at this point at one time, but now it just sits at the base of this oak tree, and there's a little old iron fence around it. They say the earliest legible marker is from 1910, and it was from a child passing away. Of course, life in these, if you will, western towns and railroad towns, and this was a lumber town as well, was very harsh, especially for the young. And here is actually that marker. Franklin Lovin, born 1906, passed away in 1910. So this is the oldest legible marker. However, knowing that they had established a town here, incorporated it really as a town in 1873, and people have been living in this area since at least the 50s. There are probably a lot more unmarked graves that are within this graveyard that are much older, and they probably used things like wood to mark the graves at that time, because they probably had a hard time getting this marble in until you started getting the railway and you actually had a town established, and you had an undertaker established who could help get the headstones and prepare one for burial. It is a very, really tranquil and nice cemetery. And I'm really enjoying hearing all the birds singing in the area. Feels more like spring here in Texas. Hey, we're in spring, Texas. Than it does January. Wow, look at these ones. The Bonds family. 1926 and 1922. And somebody, it looks like they used to have beautiful cherubs on the side, but unfortunately it looks like people have destroyed them through time. Here's more of the Bonds family and another interesting marker. One thing I've noticed in a lot of my travels is we get a lot of these, I think they're called jonquils, if I remember correctly, flowers growing in the graveyards here. And I don't know if there's some significance to that or not, but there are a lot of them that I see in a lot of the cemeteries and graveyards, especially the old ones here in Texas as I tour around. Well, this is interesting. This is Woodman of the World Memorial for Ralph Fritz, who passed away in 1912. I wonder if he was part of the lumber industry here. He obviously must have been somebody pretty important, because that's a pretty amazing marker. Really a piece of art. And it looks like there was a number of folks, part of the Fritz family, that were buried here. And at the end of the Fritz families, the large memorial there, the Ralph Fritz one, it looks like there's some markers that just say rest in peace, including this one, which looks like there used to be a better marker here, and maybe something quite ornate, and now all that's left is a doll which is being overrun, looks like, by fire ants in there. This may be the type of thing that you base a whole scary movie franchise off of. That is really interesting and creepy at the same time. I noticed there's a lot of these just rest in peace markers, and I wonder if at some point a historic society or some kind of historian or preacher came out here and put markers where the headstones have been lost through time. Here is a marker from someone who served in World War I in the 9th Infantry 2nd Division. It was a corporal. Wow. Frederick Robinson. I know I'm here to look at the cemetery gravesite, but look at this tree, and those are all mushrooms growing along a tree over a little creek that's immediately next to the Spring Cemetery. That's pretty amazing. As I head towards the road and the back side of the church that sits between the cemetery and the road that now looks abandoned, well, see, there seems to be far fewer old markers, or markers that are still in any kind of shape. There's a number of these rest in peace, and they have pipes on them, and I don't know if the pipes have some kind of significance, if they are just to help put markers in the ground for where the headstones would be, so they can use those as like for surveying, so they can know the rows for markers if they had the old historic plots. There is this one last marker surrounded by all these flowers, and maybe these are, I see these ones falling down, maybe these are paperwhites. If anybody knows flowers better than me, which is probably anybody, let me know what you think those are, because they are beautiful, but they're just starting to come into bloom here, which is also unusual because it's January. It's an early part of January here in Texas, And as you saw probably in the intro, I'm still wearing a jacket, but some of these flowers are starting to pop out and the birds are singing because it's a beautiful sunny day. Here are some more markers, and again, another World War I vet. It's fascinating to me. So often in my travels, I'll see things like Civil War vets or World War II vets or Vietnam vets, but to see a World War I vet, and actually not just one, but two in the same cemetery, is really unusual in my experience, especially for a small town like this. And here is a World War II vet, and a number of just markers that say rest in peace. So these are markers that must have been lost through time. And there's a series of those going through on either side where they have these rest in peace markers. For those of you who follow me and have been following me for a while and have seen me go to some of these other cemeteries, like out in Virginia City, Nevada, which is probably the largest Boot Hill cemetery I think you can go to, I'm always so fascinated when I come to these cemeteries about the stories here. So these are all people, they all had lives in this area, they all had families, they all had adventures, they all had their own stories that happened and occurred and are now gone. And I'm always fascinated if anybody can share any of those stories along the way. You know, they often say dead but not forgotten. And that's why I think it's important to try to share some of these places and share some of the stories of the people that came before us. I am always fascinated by history. I'm fascinated by people. I'm fascinated by their stories and how they got to where they were and what kind of adventures and things they got up to. Now that we've taken a look at the Spring Cemetery, let's go over and check out, as I said before, one of the most unusual cemeteries I've ever ran across in all my travels. So we're going to go over and go visit the Wunsche family cemetery over on the other side of Spring, and it's about between 8 and 10 minutes probably from this location going to the west. We'll head over there and take a look at that cemetery and learn a little bit about the Wunsche family. Across from me, along this busy road, is probably one of the most unusual cemeteries I've ever ran across in all my travels, and that is the Wunsche family cemetery, which sits between this feeder road and the freeway on the other side. And they were allowed to keep the cemetery here, which was from one of the founding families here in the Spring, Texas area. One of the most unusual setups for a cemetery I've ever seen. I wanted to go check it out with you all as we're learning about all these unusual cemeteries here in Old Town Spring, so let's go take a look at this. From across the street, you can get an idea about all the traffic going by. You can probably hear all the road noise. And when I often think of things like cemeteries or graveyards, I usually think of tranquil settings. This is the exact opposite of one of those. Now the story goes, the Wunsche family, which set up a lot of what we see in Old Town Spring, and in Spring itself, including having a high school named after the family, came here in the 1840s from Saxony, Germany. And the family arrived into Texas through Galveston in the 1840s and moved their way north until they came here and set up around an old camp here in Spring, Texas, where they helped start a lumber mill. They also had a famous bar and saloon, which I'll take you by after this. And they had one of the most successful businesses in the area, and it helped create the town that it is today. Walking into the cemetery, it is actually quite a pretty cemetery in the sense that it has these large trees associated with it, but there is a lot of road noise. It is anything but peaceful. And you can see where there are two old crypts here, and I think these are some of the earliest family members buried here. There's a couple old crypts. There's three right in a row here that have all fallen into disrepair, unfortunately. The first interment here, I believe, was in 1863, and the latest was all the way to 1959, when they were actually working on starting to clear and create this freeway that's behind us, which is Highway 45. So much like the other cemetery we visited, there's literally thousands and probably tens of thousands of people that pass this every day. here in Houston have no idea that this cemetery resides right next to the freeway they're driving along. So why is the cemetery here? Well, this used to all be the Wunsche land and the Wunsche homestead, as far as you can kind of see in this area, which isn't very far going that way with a freeway. But this all used to be the Wunsche's land and where they set up their house and their homestead. And now you can see it's a series of shopping centers and freeways, and there's one of the high schools here in the area. And it just sits as a reminder of how things change through time. I was looking for the oldest grave marker that I can find, and Ernst Wunsche was born 12th February 1863 and passed away in 1886. So this is a pretty old headstone, and I don't see too many that are older than this. Let me see what else I can find. Here's Frederick Wunsche, born in 1837, passed away in 1897. And there's some writing in German on there that I don't know what it says. Here's just a spectacular gravestone. I've said this before in my other videos, but back when they would put grave markers, they made them such works of art when they could, and this is one of those ones that's absolutely beautiful. Right next to this marker, this is Oleana Wunsche's gravesite. She was murdered when she was 21 years old here in Spring, and as I understand it, they never found who did it, but it was quite a blow to the family and to the community. This is a view of this Wunsche cemetery panning all the way from the entrance going across, and you get an idea. There's quite a few Wunsches in this area. They had a number of children, the original Wunsche family here. I believe it was 6 or 7, so you can imagine they had pretty large family, and so you end up with a pretty well established cemetery here. And as I understand it, not all of the Wunsches have been buried here. Some have actually been buried in other places, but you get an idea about this really unusual cemetery. From this cemetery, let's go take a look at a couple spots in Old Town Spring I want to share with you all. And I've done a video on Old Town Spring before, so I'll link that, or I'll put a link up once we get to the actual town site. Welcome everybody to Old Town Spring, and from that cemetery we were just at, you're going to recognize the name on top of the saloon and old hotel that was set up here in the early 1900s by the Wunsche family to help service those who are traveling along the train tracks here or taking train rides north and south from Houston to Dallas or to other locations. The Wunsche family set up this saloon and hotel to service those folks and give them a break along the train route or to wait to even catch the train. And this building's been in place since 1902 and it's still operational, and I will say is one of my favorite places to come if I want a good cheeseburger in the area and just a really cool environment and ambiance. It is still up and running in a place that if you come to Old Town Spring, you can come have a meal inside of this famous and historic saloon and cafe. And it's not just famous for the saloon and cafe and because it's a historic building on the Texas historic sites, but it's also considered one of the most haunted buildings in this area. And they actually do haunted tours where they say you can sometimes see a ghostly figure in these windows up here. Because it's such an old hotel, it has a lot of interesting history associated with being along the railroad line, and wherever you have somewhere like that, there's lots of people coming and going and tragic deaths as well. I want to give you a shot of Old Town Spring. So we're on the eastern side of Old Town Spring now. This area is a few blocks wide, and there's actually a number of shops here that I like to go to, including some rock shops and places that have some historic significance. And if you saw my video on Old Town Spring, which I will connect up here that I've done before, I talk about Mallett's here. Mallett's actually has an old vault in it. So this is the old Texas State Bank. And this was actually robbed multiple times in the 1930s. And there are rumors that some people from the Bonnie and Clyde game potentially robbed it as well. One of my favorite spots to go and visit, and it is. a rock shop, so you can never go wrong with that. I realize this is a video really focused on talking about the forgotten unusual cemeteries around Spring, Texas. However, since I had to come down here to the Old Town Spring area already, I did want to share a couple of these locations with you. So if you all ever make it into this area, you know, some places to come grab some food, some places to come do some unique shopping. And talking about the old train stations and the old train tracks over here and people traveling through this area, this is actually the old train station that's been changed into a restaurant called Puffin Billy's, which is probably my favorite place to come down here and eat other than Wunsche Saloon. They're the two places I eat at most often, and they actually have open mic nights here. They get bluegrass bands playing, they get country bands and western bands playing and rock and roll bands. All kinds of different bands will play here. They have an open mic night on Thursday nights, and the food is really good. One of the most unique shops in the area is known as Thad's, and I've been coming here to do holiday shopping and shopping for unique gifts for birthdays for well over a decade now, probably closer to 12-15 years. And this is one of my favorite shops to come into, just to even look around, because they have very eclectic things and very unique gifts. So I do want to give Thad's a plug. Some of the stores here are really unique. You're not going to find them anywhere else, like Crossroads here, which is Tex, Mex, and Czech. We've gone in here and purchased gifts for the holidays. We've gone in here now, purchased gifts for birthdays. They have very unique items and are definitely worth checking out if you're down here in Old Town Spring. As I walk along the street here in Old Town Spring, I just want you all to see kind of the ambiance and what the homes look like behind me. And really all of these are different boutique shops or unusual places that are a lot of fun to come walk around. And speaking of one of the oldest homes, behind me is, I believe, what was known as the White House, or the Hudson's White Hall. And this was an old boarding house in the early 1900s. So as you had a lot of folks traveling on the railway, there's a lot of lumber industry going on that actually the Wunsche family is part of. This house was built and they would rent out their rooms here, and it's become a number of things. Today, it's another rock shop, so definitely a thumbs up for me and worth checking out. That's a little bit about the forgotten and unusual cemeteries here in Spring, Texas, as well as a quick walk through parts of the town of Old Town Spring and some places I like to go. If you come here and visit, check out those cemeteries, really interesting. I hope they're not forgotten and people still remember they're around here. One of the reasons I wanted to make this video. And come down and check out the great ambiance and the shops and the food here in Old Town Spring. It is very unique for this area. It's one of my favorite go-to places. You may even run into me running around here on the weekends. I try to come here at least once or twice a month and just roam around. So with all that being said, thank you for joining me today. I hope you learned something. I know I learned a lot. I had a lot of fun today. Finding the most unusual cemetery that I've ever seen, helping hopefully shed light on another cemetery that I hope is not forgotten and continues to be taken care of. You all know what to do at this point. If you enjoy this video, you enjoy my channel, I love hearing from you all. I hope you all have a wonderful day and take care. I just love the unusual things here in Old Town Spring. You're going to see like the Loose Caboose Barbecue Burgers and More place, where I believe they cook and they have the kitchen inside of that caboose.